Hello, good evening, everyone. My name is Melanie McNair. I'm the Senior Director of Public Programming here at the Center for Fiction. How many of you are joining us for the first time this evening? Oh, great. Well, welcome. If you're not familiar with us, we're the only nonprofit that focuses on the creation and enjoyment of fiction. And we also have a series of events we do here called On America, where we bring in journalists and writers to talk about kind of issues that are happening in our country. And of course, one of the things that was kind of made more apparent during the pandemic was the issues of addiction that are just kind of spiraling out of control in a lot of places here. So we're really happy to host this conversation. A few housekeeping announcements. We will have an audience Q&A tonight, and if you're here, please raise your hand and one of our interns will bring a microphone to you, and that's so that the people who are watching on the live stream can also hear your question. And if you're on the live stream, you can type your question in the chat at any point, and I will read it from the audience for you. And when the event is over, the bookstore has copies of the book, and they are pre-signed, but please come back in here after you buy it, and Laura will be happy to personalize it for you. And then you can also say hi. All right, let me introduce our fabulous guest this evening. Laura Robbins is an author, freelance writer, speaker, and host of the popular podcast, The Only One in the Room. She has been active for many years as a speaker and school trustee and is credited for creating the Buckley School's nationally recognized Committee on Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Justice. Her recent articles in HuffPost and the Temper on the subjects of race, recovery, and divorce have garnered her worldwide acclaim. She's a 2022 TEDx speaker and an LA Moth Story Slam winner. Currently, she sits on the advisory boards of the San Diego Writers Festivals and the Outliers HQ Podcast Festival. Joining her is Emily McCombs. She's the deputy editor of HuffPost Personal, where she writes and edits first-person essays. She also gives advice in a weekly column at Slate. And Jessica Hoppe is a Honduran-Ecuadorian writer based in New York City. She's been featured on ABC News, HBO Max, and her work has appeared in the Latino Book Review, the New York Times, Vogue, Gen Magazine, Paper Magazine, and elsewhere. Jessica is a board member of the Time of Butterflies, a nonprofit supporting families through domestic abuse recovery, and an advocate with Sad Girls Club, and a digital mental resource for BIPOC women and femmes. She's currently writing her debut memoir, First in the Family, which is forthcoming in 2024 from Flatiron. Please welcome them all to the stage.
Hello.
You turn your mic back on.
Is mine on? Can you guys hear me?
Hi. So I want to tell you a little bit about my relationship with Laura, because in 2018, I got a pitch from a writer about what it felt like to be the only Black person at a 600-person writers retreat run by some very prominent authors. And Laura's voice jumped off the page. I was basically desperate to publish it. I offered her like 3 times our normal rate just to make sure that no one else got it. And it rightfully went mega viral. And it launched our relationship at HuffPost, where we've now done 19 essays together.
Yes, we have.
And many of those essays were about race and recovery and how they intersect, which was of particular interest to me as a fellow woman in recovery, but also topics that people were not really talking about.
Right.
And Laura is. So I thought I knew your story pretty well after all those essays, and then I read your book. What made you, one of the things that I remember you saying to me about hiding your addiction is I didn't want to be discussed.
Yes.
So how did you get from there to putting it all in a book?
That is a good question, Emily. First of all, I want to thank the Center for Fiction for having us here today. And I am here on a quick trip from Los Angeles, and this was the reason to come to New York, was to be here with you all at this fabulous place that celebrates books and reading. And so I just wanted to thank them for hosting us, and thank these two ladies for joining me on stage today. Humbled and super grateful. What was the question? Oh, yes, putting it all out there, right? So yes, I'm a very private person. This is true. This is, anybody who knows me knows this about me. So it feels like a big contradiction to have written this very vulnerable memoir about things that no one knew about. I hid them very well from everybody, including my now ex-husband, including my parents, including my friends, including the other moms at the school. Like, no one knew. And no one would have ever known had I not chose to come forward and write about this. But I wrote about it for two reasons. One, shame was killing me. It's one of the reasons I stayed in my addiction for so long, because I was so ashamed of I think I felt like I was ashamed of who I was, but really what I was ashamed of was what I was doing and how I was doing it, and the circumstances that I found myself in as a result of the addiction. And I didn't want to expose that. That felt like the worst thing I could do. Telling the story was like the panacea for that shame, and I would never have known that. It felt like exposing it would make it worse, like putting a light on it would make me want to hide, and or hide more than I was. And so telling the story, which is something I've been in recovery for almost 15 years, we tell our stories a lot. And so that's what I found, is telling the story really helped. It helped that shame. It helped me realize that I was, sick trying to get well, not bad trying to be good. And the other thing was that I also found that there weren't people like me who look like me telling these stories. I found myself in very white spaces with women who were pillars in the recovery world, telling and vibing with their stories, like, yes, I used like that. Yes, I drank like that. Yes, I hid like that. But I didn't see women of color in this space, and I didn't find them in books. Books are the way I navigate the world. It's been like that since I was 5 years old. And so eventually, after not finding it, it seemed to me like the only logical thing was to write about this for the next people that come along.
For both of you, because you both write about your experiences in addiction, what is the emotional impact of going back into that space? Because I feel like in recovery, we work on getting a lot of distance from that inner addict. Where does it kind of take you emotionally to have to summon that up and harness it for your work?
You want to start?
Sure. I was shocked at what the experience would feel like, but I recently answered this question. Someone asked if, is there enough time? Has it been enough time since, these things occur to write about them? Do you have enough distance? And today is my niece's birthday. She turned 7, which means I'm going to be 7 years sober soon.
Yes,
And
yes.
Thank you. So her life really marked, the start of a new life for me, and so it's always really wonderful to just look towards the future and an actual person who's growing. But yeah, in the beginning, I did a lot of really paranoid investigation and research into my own life, looking up messages and text messages, and then I realized the way it sounded on the page was that I was like justifying myself. I was like still asking permission to tell it, and still thinking I didn't know, you know, what I was talking about. So part of this has been an incredible experience because I know what the fuck I'm talking about. And I've had the experiences, I remember them. And when I'm unsure about something, I just write that into the story. You know, there is the inciting moment, the rock bottom is an event that occurred in a complete blackout, and I have no memory of it to this day. But a woman was there, and she saved my life, and she told me. So that's how it's told in the story. You know, it's completely honest, and also it's still a creative endeavor. And a memoir is not meant to be exactly the facts as they are. That you know, it's your perspective, and you're telling your story, and not your life story. It's also not an autobiography. So yeah, I have to remind myself of that. And once I realized I was doing that, mostly to protect myself from ex-boyfriends, I thought, well, those are the most boring parts, so they're gone, and that was very liberating.
Are there, what are the, you know, we're talking about exposing these deeply intimate details. What are the special considerations that come with being a woman of color and putting those things out there? Were there fears that you had about how things would be perceived?
For me, the thing that kept me in my addiction, one of the many things that kept me in it, was the perception, or was the idea of how I would be perceived once I said I need help. Because I was a black woman, again, in these very white spaces. I was in a leadership position at my children's very white elite school. And I didn't want to be that. I didn't want to take all the other black parents down with me. I didn't want to take all the black people in the world down with me, because, you know, I didn't just feel like I was representing. That burden was placed on me. I still carry it. I'm carrying it right now in front of you. And the idea of asking for help for an addiction, you know, this was something that we parent association presidents sat around and gossiped about people who needed to go to rehab. We whispered about them. We drank, you know, while we were talking about how terrible their lives must be. For me to admit that I was one of them was something I wasn't willing to do for a very long time. But telling this story, I'm shocked that there aren't more voices of women of color in this genre, in this quit lit genre. If you Google quit lit, you do not see authors of color. There are authors of color in the genre, but if you Google it, you don't see them. You get a list of white women, some of whom I love, who have written amazing books, but you don't see any written by women who look like us, who have the experience of the person who's been marginalized in this society, on whom there is an extra burden when we say we need help, when we say, you know, culturally, there's a stigma for people who didn't just go to church and get sober, people who talk about their problems outside the family. It's not okay. So someone needs to be able to browse discreetly in their bookshop and see a book written by a woman of color about getting sober, about recovery, about addiction, and say, oh, she looks like me, let me check this out. So the impact of that, and there's no shame for me in telling the story in that respect.
Yeah. Good for you.
Yeah.
Shame, yeah, taking on shame. Yeah, I'm still dealing with it, to be honest. I think the most important part for me was to understand the history of why I felt the way I felt. Because when I came into recovery, I was like, oh fuck, like this, what? These are like, why didn't I know this? Like, why is it the first time I'm hearing this? Why, you know, where the fuck have I been? Like, why didn't I know this? And it was difficult to not look at my family and be like, are we stupid? Are we fucking ignorant? Are we judgmental? Are we, you know, and not judge my family? And see, here I'm crying, not yet. So it's the same obstacle every time. You know, if you're not a white man writing anything, particularly any kind of addiction narrative, you're not going to be offered the full spectrum of your humanity, period. So you're constantly working, you know, checking yourself, writing yourself, and then what was interesting about that was, you know, I'm not like not willing to go there. I'm not like, you know, not an honest person or a good writer. It's for a reason. Like, you have to understand the programming if you're going to deprogram. So for me, it's like, if you go back to the beginning, to De Quincey in the 1820s, and he's, you know, from a professor I spoke to, like the grandfather of addiction narrative, right? He wrote Opium, like Confessions of an Opium Eater. In this time, we know that opium was raging, and we know in this country we were criminalizing Chinese immigrants for it. Period. So here begins the history. Criminalization of drugs has always been along racialized lines. Following that was anti-cocaine laws, which targeted black men in the South. Following that was anti-cannabis. Why did we start calling it marijuana? So that we could attach it to Mexican people, Mexican migrants, Mexican people. So today, the story on fentanyl is that migrant children and women and families are carrying fentanyl on their person, on their backpack, coming for you to poison your white teenagers in the suburbs. That's the story right now. So do I want to be the person who says, I'm an addict, Mom? Fuck no. I did not want to tell my mom that. My mom, who lost her dad to this, who didn't even tell me that's how he fucking died until I was 9 months sober. He died when I was 9 months sober. It was the first time we had that conversation. My uncle was deported for unknown reasons, mysterious reasons. He was the man who stood on a corner every fucking day, and then he wasn't there. And he would usually come back, because he was always in and out of the system, and then one day he didn't come back. He was deported back to Honduras. So this story to us becomes, because we moralize addiction, you know, you're a fuck up, you're a bad person, you're stupid, all of these things. And so of course I internalized them, as much as I would love to believe I didn't. So for most of my recovery, I was absolutely private about it. And the benefit of AA is that the spiritual foundation of AA is anonymity. And I was like, perfect, great. No one has to know. And then my cousin died of an overdose, and I knew that I hadn't talked to him about it because I didn't want my tias to know. I didn't want my mom's cousins to talk about it, about me. So I was forced, and then I thought, fuck, you know, I really need to find out all about this. So whether it's the actual process of recovering, like the living experience of it, or the chance, the ability to narrate it, it's the same thing. You know, it's absolutely by design. There's a reason these books, you know, are not heard of, because they exist. And so yeah, it's wonderful to be, you know, to be on this stage with Laura. Absolutely, this is an important historic moment, and I hope that it shines a light on the entire fucking history. That's what we're here to prove, you know, that we're not the only ones, we're not first. We're not. And you should all know that. So, but we are trying to contribute to a conversation and just hold that door open for everybody else. Anybody who wants to talk about any form of recovery, because guess what? We're all doing it. The recovery is pain management. So trust and believe you have something that you do in your life that is avoiding the way you feel, that leads to, you know, that is behavior that leads to negative consequence in your life. Trust me, every one of us has something. I don't use drugs and alcohol, but I have a ton of shit. So, yeah, that's what that is. You know, just making it more human and pulling it out of the shadows. And so you have to start naming it. You have to learn your story. And then
your history.
Yeah, and then you can write yours, you know, and then it's always future forward, like my niece's life. You know, she'll know that I'm in recovery. She will know that. She knows that. And it's not going to be something with like my uncle, you know. It's going to be something she's aware of, and that she doesn't have these preconceived, scary, or stigmatized notions about.
It makes me think, you know, and there's so much hiding in the book. Like, just a huge theme is the hiding and the code switching between identities. I love how sometimes, you know, it just cuts to your internal narrative and it's a totally different voice.
Yes.
And you know, you were in a marriage where you weren't even really able to be your authentic self for a lot of complicated reasons. Did writing the book help in any way to kind of unite those identities and contribute to a more like authentic whole?
Yeah, absolutely. So the journey that I talk about in Stash it starts with a departure. I start editing myself when I'm about 5 years old because I'm being emotionally abused by my stepfather. How I am authentically seems to rub him the wrong way. So I do the things that won't rub him the wrong way. I tamp it down. I do more of this. I do less of that. And that works. It feels, you know, at 5, 6, 7 like survival, right? This is how I survived my house. Out in school, again, in these white spaces, I do the same thing. This is acceptable. This isn't cool. Like, and it doesn't feel like a punishment. I just like, this is how I navigate. I'm going to leave that at home. I'll bring this to school, and this is what they'll see. And so I do that my whole life. And, you know, you mentioned my marriage in which I wasn't authentic. And I really like to make it clear that that was on me. You know, I came in I presented myself in such a way that I thought would be the most likable, the most acceptable, the most wifey material. And I wanted very badly to be whoever that was. What I discovered in the marriage was that I was not those things that I presented. I didn't like those things. They were not me authentically. They rubbed me the wrong way. And I felt trapped. Drugs and alcohol helped. And they help the same way they help anybody who doesn't have an addiction. You know, it's the end of a long day. It's stressing. I'm going to, you know, have a glass of wine. That feels better. I'm a little de-stressed. I'm going to take a pill to go to sleep. That's much better. I've had a good night's sleep. So it goes on and on like that. But then for me, something else starts to take over. And so the solution that was the solution for me not being authentic, right? Some people say that alcohol is the solution for alcoholism. If you believe in alcoholism, alcohol can be the solution, but then the solution becomes the problem. Because if you look at just like the ism part, you know, the I separate myself, I scare myself, I sabotage myself, the ISM, it can be the solution for all that. Now I'm bright, now I'm part of, now I'm easy to have a conversation with you. And then it became my problem. And, you know, that inability to bridge the gap between my authentic self and the life that I had to lead with alcohol and drugs became my problem. And my now ex-husband was baffled. He didn't know. You know, we had never had that discussion that this wasn't authentically me. My friends didn't know. You know, my parents didn't know. You know, I wanted my parents to be happy, which meant I needed to be happy. I didn't want them to be worried about me. So here's the front. Here's the presentation. I hope you enjoy it. And then the drugs and alcohol fail, and I'm spiraling into an addiction, and I'm so far away from my authentic self, I don't even know who that is anymore. So yes, writing this book, going back and remembering and placing, oh, that's when this happened, that's when this happened. That's when I departed more, that's when I departed more. That was a really cool, I liked that Laura at 16 who thought she was the shit, who wore her hair in an afro and a Florida Oranges t-shirt that she got when she went to visit her dad, and everybody else was wearing, you know, sticky fingers. And painter's pants, and I didn't have the right clothes. But I still liked myself then. But eventually I departed. So that is a very long answer to your question of, yes, this was cathartic for me. This helped me get back to my authentic self. Whenever I feel a departure from that now, an alarm bell goes off in my head. If I'm lying to you about anything, if I'm editing myself so that you'll like me better, I snatch myself up pretty quick. Sometimes not as quick as I'd like to. Sometimes it's the next day, and then I might call Emily and say, when I said I was 5 minutes away last night, I actually hadn't left my house. So
Relatable.
So I just, it doesn't make any difference, but I need to tell you that because it's a slippery slope for me. Kitchens and bathrooms are slippery slopes for me, and so is lying, so is being dishonest. It separates me from who I am authentically.
There's also the interesting intersection with the relative economic privilege that you were experiencing. How is there a perception? Have you come across a perception that things couldn't have been all that bad if you had like a big house and a fancy car, or you don't really experience racism if you have a certain level of class privilege?
Yes, in HuffPo.
Don't read the comments.
Don't read the comments. But yes, absolutely. I lived a life that I never ever dreamed that I would live. It was the fantasy life. It was the big house. It was a household staff. It was a 600 square foot closet. It was, alphabetizing my shoes, coat closet. My coat closet was according to color. It was stuff I actually didn't even want. But this was the life that I thought I was expected to lead because this is what I had. I felt the obligation of that. Someone said to me a few months ago, like, yes, are we allowed to be despondent? Are we allowed to be bereft when we have all the trappings? And the answer is, for me, yes. I had, I say this in the flap jacket of the book, privilege doesn't protect you from pain. I was miserable. I was killing myself with drugs and alcohol every night. I wasn't trying to. But obviously I did not care enough about myself in this very beautiful, gorgeous, Hollywood privileged life to make my instinct for self-preservation my priority. It wasn't. Neither was my maternal instinct, which I think is the biggest instinct I have. I would do anything for my boys. And then there was this. There was this dark cloud, this monster, this juggernaut that I call my addiction, that was bigger than all of it. Self-preservation, maternal instinct. And there wasn't a Cartier watch or a pair of Louboutins that would make a dent in that. There wasn't anything that anybody could buy me that would get me better, that would get me well. And so my priorities, once I got sober, there was a big shift, but yeah, I think the perception is sometimes that I wasn't allowed. And that's another reason why I wrote the book. It's, you think if you have a car and the car and the driver and the staff and all that then you'll be happy. That's what I thought. And it didn't equal happy. No, money is nice, like money is, I'm not saying money isn't anything, but it can't be the only thing. The only thing has to be my recovery, then my kids. This is a batting order that Scott's my boyfriend sitting there, we established right away in our recovery because we had met in recovery and we wanted to explore a new relationship, but we knew that we had to have really ironclad boundaries around that because we had too much at stake. He has his 2 daughters, my 2 boys. So our recovery came first no matter what. My kids came second no matter what. Second to my recovery. Everything else, including each other, came third, which meant if my kids wanted me to stay home and not go to a meeting because they wanted to snuggle with me, as badly as I wanted to do that, I had to go to that meeting, and I had to explain to them why. Then I could come home and snuggle with them. Without that, I don't have that. Without this, I don't have that. And, you know, without this, I don't have any of it. You know, I don't know where I am. I don't know what institution I'm in. I don't know where I'm buried. I don't know what prison I'm in. But it's not here.
Will you read a little something for us?
Yeah.
Can we hear a little bit of the book?
It has almost nothing to do with addiction.
Okay, perfect.
This is from, I was on the Tamron Hall show yesterday.
Woo!
And
Yes.
Tamron read this paragraph, which I had never kind of, like, the paragraph didn't stick out to me as something to read, but she really liked it, so I'm going to read it to you. It's from the chapter called Nightmare on Field Street. And so I'll just read it. When people talk about enduring, it's usually in an admirable way. They bravely endure the pain of childbirth, or they endure poverty or hunger. The goal is to make it through these types of things and come out stronger, right? I've seen people endure unhappy marriages for years, justifying their cowardice by saying things like, it's too complicated, or it's better than being alone. Then stay until they're too old to find love again, or until they die. I've been blaming the demise of our marriage on my addiction, which blew up spectacularly this year. But if I'm being honest, we've been unhappy for longer than that. I feel as though I've been hanging on to a window ledge for the past 2 years, and now my fingers are starting to slip. All this time, I've been so terrified of the fall that I haven't even dared think about where I might land. But what if I've been afraid of the wrong thing? What if it's not where I land that should concern me, but why I'm still hanging on? Then again, what if I get out and too late realize that this was happiness?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Circling back to the idea of the impact that this book is going to have on the recovery community, the quit lit
Yes.
genre. You know, you wrote, the last essay that you wrote for me was about the idea of it's sobriety only for white women.
Yes.
How does that lack of representation on the bookshelves, you know, affect people with marginalized identities who may be struggling with addiction?
You want to talk about that?
You want me first? Okay.
Yeah, you first.
I love this question.
Yeah.
And I loved your piece about it, Laura. I was thinking a lot about it and reading it because normally when I hear that question, I feel very defensive. You know, I'm like, well, who does that question center? Well, who do you know? Don't you know about? And so, I'd love to talk about it, you know, with you as a Black woman because you have a sense of what I'm thinking, what I'm feeling, and anyway, what I think is that, again, it's all by design, right? So if you have a history of erasure, if you have a history of revisionist history, you know, that's our country. We completely revised history, we picked up where we wanted, and we centered the people that we wanted, and we erased everybody else. So for me, when I came into recovery, I only saw white folks. This was in Tribeca. I mean, I had fucking Googled the nearest meeting like my therapist told me to do. I was holed up at a friend's house because I didn't have any place to live, and that was the meeting. And I sat on the floor, and there was someone famous there, and I listened to them, and I did hear things that I'd never heard before. And then I started to realize pretty quickly that the freedom that people felt that sharing in this way, which I took full advantage of, was for a particular reason, and that my story and my recovery was not following the same path. I was not getting the cash and prizes. So I was like, damn, I was more and more disconnected because not only was it not working for me, right? Because a reward system like the one that AA is built on that tells you to collect things, collect time, collect coins, work towards a life, cash and prizes, that's capitalism, right? So at the end, it really, really played against this other story as the daughter of Central American, South American immigrants of the American dream. It was just a version of the American dream. So what I'm interrogating in my book is the American dream is the ultimate gateway drug. And that is, you know, taking the history of addiction and criminalization and recovery and my life and my family history and putting them side by side on a course towards liberation. So on that journey, I found out that, you know, Frederick Douglass was talking about being absolutely withheld from the temperance movement. There's so much violence that occurred to keep black people out of recovery and also to criminalize them. We're all aware of the war on drugs, et cetera. And indigenous peoples invented recovery 200 years before Bill and Bob ever had the notion and every opportunity to recover. Because we know that Bill had so many different things that he tried and failed and tried and failed. When they sat down and were like, this is what the fuck it is, and everyone was like, yeah. But there's actually a really interesting woman, Marty Mann, a queer woman, who was responsible through all of her connections for the success, the ubiquity of AA. It was really her work that fucking did it. We never talk about her.
No.
But the legacy of white women being so centered, it is like, it's so obvious. Because again, we're talking about the full spectrum of your humanity, right? And so if we get like kind of this commercialized version of it. It's like, so I realized, wow, this like pot at the end of the recovery rainbow, this pot of gold thing, it's not grounding me. But when I thought about the indigenous history, the sobriety circles, Handsome Lake, I was like, that's what it is. It's story. It's story. That's it. So if you follow if recovery is the process of narration, and so you have to find your story, right? And clinicians say, doctors say that healing is wholeness. And so you can't be whole unless you know your story. And so you have to take on your story. So you have to know all of the fucking story. So I get to know all of my recovery ancestors. I get to know my real life ancestors. And I know that my grandfather became an alcoholic because he worked on a plantation in Honduras run by U.S. colonizers, extractionists. That's my fucking history that lives in my body. That's my legacy. And it goes back even further. But there were also people in that time who knew that was happening, who traced it, just like here in this country. So yeah, I think that when you like kind of, you reveal all that, I don't feel so bad that there are like all of these books in Quitlet. But yeah, I do feel like, oh no, we need more. Like this is dusty, next. Like, next. What I want is like, it's you know, it's the William Burroughs, you know, like I'm a drug addict and that's and there's no self-interrogation. What's the contribution? The fact that you're a drug user. You know, I guess I'm interested to read it. I don't know. No, I know. But like the parts of my drug use and my alcoholism, they're really like not central at all. It's about the recovery and the interrogation of it all. But the fact that it's all, you know, it really is white women being elevated for you know, having the courage to step forward. It can be very frustrating, very isolating. So it's great to be in conversation with Laura, and it's great to read this book. And I swear to God, I'll never touch a fucking pill.
Definitely not an Ambien.
I was like, oh my God, pills are. Woo. But yeah, I'm really excited for this new chapter.
And I'll just add to what you said, which it's hard for me to even think about adding because I'm so in while you're talking and listening to this history.
No, yeah, I know we talk about it.
Yes.
Yeah.
But
Yes.
the amount of choices that are on the shelves, if you are a white woman and you go to a bookstore and you look, you can find a story like mine where someone is privileged and is in a leadership position at their kid's school and maybe getting a divorce. You can find stories where there are drug dens and prostitution. You can find a variety of stories about addiction, about recovery. You cannot find those written by women of color, and I think that's really, it doesn't necessarily mean that my story is going to speak to everybody. It's absolutely not. But it should be amongst the other ones that do, written by people of color. Any person of color should be able to walk up to a shelf and have a variety of books to choose from, because they'll find one of them that tells their story, and it should be written by somebody who looks like them, that can reflect an experience like the one in which they grew up. And that's where I think, this is what I'm hearing. This has been out for a week, right? And so the DMs that I'm getting are, thank you for writing this. I'm a Black woman in recovery. Thank you for writing this. There is a dearth of this. There is a void. People are thirsty, excuse the pun, for these types of voices. These books need to be written. And again, not just by me, but yes, by this book, because that will inform the system that there is a market for these stories, and then more books will be created with these voices, and then there will be a variety.
Yes. Hear, hear.
Yeah. Thank you.
More specifically, what would you like individual readers to take away from the book? What do you hope that they come away with?
So I was 43 years old when I got sober. Thought I was too old. It was too late. I walked into the room and I was definitely one of the older people in the room. I lost the ability to read and write for pleasure when I got sober. Didn't think I'd ever be able to pick that up again. Didn't know who I was, like I was talking about before. I think what I want people to know when they pick up this book is that if you have departed from the path that you know to be true for you, it's not too late. It's never too late. And it's okay, whatever your path looks like, to get to where you're going. My path is not one that I would recommend to anybody. I wouldn't say, spiral down into an Ambien addiction and go to treatment and get a divorce and meet the man you're going to spend the next 15 years with and, figure out how to be a mom to your kids while this spotlight is on you, but I wouldn't change anything because I'm sitting here, with this book, with these articles, with this podcast that I have this really fulfilling, amazing, a life that I'm profoundly grateful for, that I'm excited to lead. I'm no longer enduring, I'm no longer waiting to master anything. I never will. I don't care. I'm having fun. I'm really enjoying my life, which is something that I didn't know was possible, when I was living the year that I write about in this book. So I hope people take away the possibility of hope, the possibility of happiness. Like that's really my message. Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, if you're afraid to leave for something else, if there's a possibility of happiness on the other side of that, can you let go? Let go of the window ledge and see where you land for the possibility of happiness, if there's no possibility where you are.
I think that's a good place to,
Yes.
go out.
Yeah.
So we are going to do a Q&A if anybody has questions. I think there will be mics, yeah.
Just raise your hand.
Thank you. Hi, Laura.
Hi.
This is so wonderful. I'm going to be a downer. You ended on such a high note. But I want to ask just a couple of infrastructure questions and craft questions.
Yes.
What was your process for writing the book? How did it get written? I know there are a lot of writers and memoirists in the room who'd like to know.
The way that I wrote this book, so for those of you who don't know, didn't graduate from high school, I didn't go to college. So I don't have a formal education. I didn't know anything about structure or craft when I started writing this. I just opened a portal and just, I want to say, this is what I didn't do this. I'm typing. Like, that's how I wrote the book. I didn't write anything down like this. But I was just like, yeah, so I was, talking to my agent, who's wonderful, Rebecca Gradinger, who's sitting right there. And she's like, do you want to write a proposal or do you want to try writing the book? And I was like, I'll try writing the book. Let's
Go,
see how that
girl.
goes.
Damn, I didn't go that route.
Yeah.
And you wrote it in 6 months, right?
I wrote it in 6 months. I wrote from 11 to 7, 5 days a week.
Incredible.
I turned my phone over. I turned on Mary Tyler Moore in the background, and I wrote. And it wasn't hard. It honestly wasn't. I didn't take a big chunk of my life. I have day planners with copious notes in them. I have journals. I have pictures. I had all this stuff to go back. I have my divorce decree, which looks like a phone book. Some of you don't know what that is, but it used to be a book of everyone's phone numbers in the city. And it looks like that. So I went through all that factual material to double check, to cross check my memory. But it was not, and when I say it wasn't hard to write, I don't mean that emotionally it wasn't hard to write, but it wasn't difficult to grab the information and get it on. I knew what needed to come out. So that was what I did. We have a podcast, Scott and I did that in the morning, took care of business before 11, and then I devoted myself to writing. Rebecca read as I wrote, not like page by page, but like a stack of pages, and then she would read and give me notes and guide me through, and then it was done 6 months later.
Wow.
Yeah.
I didn't have time to embarrass Scott.
I tried.
Just so you know, Stash is also a love story.
Yes,
Yes.
it is.
I'll ask another question, Laura, about the
Adhishri.
editorial process. So you took 6 months to write. Some of us take 2 decades to write. What was the editorial process like, and what were the surprises that your editor actually pointed out that you weren't expecting?
We found an amazing editor in Michelle Mulligan Herrera. She's at Atria, Simon & Schuster. The privilege that I had was that we had a couple of people that we could have worked with. We found the right one for this story, someone who really understood the story and why it needed to be told. For me, it was also important that this person be a woman of color. I didn't know if that was going to happen, but that is what happened. And she loved the story. It was a completed manuscript, but she wanted me to go back and talk about why I was the way that I was, because the way that I wrote it is I'm dropping you into my body. It's active first person, very sensorial. Like I needed you to feel everything that I was feeling so you could go along this ride with me for 10 months. I don't ever pop out and give you perspective on what that felt like or what it was like. I didn't write it like that. So Michelle really wanted me to go back and fill in some of the stuff from my childhood. There were dynamics in the book that didn't make sense without that. Where did this start? Why are you so intent on giving people nothing? Not letting them know, what you're thinking or how you're feeling, because I was like that from a kid, right? And I didn't want to explain any of that. I really didn't. I was quite resistant. Not to her, but internally I was like, this doesn't need to be explained. A smart reader will understand exactly why this book isn't written for the people who don't understand that. But she understood that this needed to be dug down into and explored, and the book is so much better for it. I'm really glad that she insisted that this be part of it. Yeah.
Hi, I'm reading your book on Audible, and I think you did an exceptional job with the narration. I wanted to let you know that.
Thank you.
And I had two questions for you. One is, was there ever a point where you feared for the kind of family patterns that happens with your children, and how you navigated whatever anxiety that might have brought up, whether or not they were going to develop an addiction as well at some point? And the other is, do you have any advice for people who have friends who may be going in that direction, or you suspect may be hiding kind of similar issues with addiction, about how to show up for them and be there for them and make it a shame-free zone for them to feel safe?
Good questions. I think, yeah, of course, I would be afraid that my children would end up with what I have. It's been passed down to me from my father and my father's father and all of his brothers. He was one of 18, y'all, same parents. All the men died of alcoholism or alcohol-related diseases. So of course, there's a possibility. The way that I live my life now, though, is I don't worry about those types of things. I can't control it. You know, I could lock him in a box, but I don't know if that would work, and he'd be miserable. My best efforts, especially with my children, are just to align myself with what is, you know. And I tell this story when my older son was terrible at basketball when he was 12, and he was on the team, and they didn't let him play the whole game, and finally at the end they put him in, and someone passed him the ball, and he needed to make a free throw in order for his team to win the game. It like went south really quickly, and this was a clutch free throw, and I knew he wasn't going to make it. And I was so I literally got down on my knees and I said, "Oh, please, I will do anything if you let him make this free throw, please." And then he's dribbling and kind of warming up, and I realized my mistake. So I get back down and I say, "No matter what happens, thank you for letting me be here." So I can either be there for him when he doesn't make it, or I can cheer him on when he does. But I get to be present for it. And that's all I can be for my kids, is present. And I totally forgot your second question.
Wait, but did he make it?
Oh, he didn't make it. He didn't make it. He was devastated. And the team was mad at him. Yeah, it was terrible.
I'm rooting for you.
He did become the team manager. Yeah.
The second question was about a friend creating a shame-free zone for friends experiencing addiction.
I will give you a short answer, and then I'll let these ladies answer. There was nothing that anybody could have said to me that would have made my journey different. I don't think. And that's like, I shouldn't say that. I shouldn't say there wasn't anything. But nobody said anything that made me alter my journey. However, there were very kind people who showed up in this very sober way, and they were an example for me. So that when I was ready, I actually went to them and asked for help. Not because they offered it to me, but because they were this shining example of sobriety. So being that for somebody is a really powerful thing. But I don't know what words anybody could have said that would have made me think, let me rethink the way this is going. Because I was so in it. You know, everybody was the enemy. Everybody who was trying to take it away from me was the enemy. And, you know, you were either my enemy or my friend. And if you were my friend, you could get in a little bit. But if you were my enemy, you were way out there. You were discarded. You weren't getting back in. Do you want to answer that a little?
Well, it made me think of when you were talking about, you know, what a powerful force motherhood is, and a mother's love or a parent's love for their child, I think, is probably one of the most powerful forces in the world.
Yeah.
Not enough to get me sober.
Right. Yeah.
Addiction stronger than that, which is like, if loving your child can't get you sober, I don't think anyone can do it. It really is just like a moment of grace that we experience. And I find it very hard to explain and very hard to understand. And not all of us get it, In fact, very few of us do. But I do think being a safe place for your friend to be honest and authentic. And, for me, they say secrets keep you sick. And even when things were bad, even when I was relapsing over and over again, even when I couldn't stay sober, having those people in my life that I could show up and be honest about where I was made a big difference for me.
Yeah.
What about you, Jessica?
I have to echo that. Like, I do agree. It's not. I don't think anyone could have told me. It's very lucky that I was a stranger. And she asked me something that changed my life, and that from the moment she asked me this, I just made it like, it was just my focus, and I asked myself this consistently. She told me what had happened the night she saved my life and everything that I did, and it's shockingly unbelievable, but I knew it was true. And then she said, do you know what's happening to you? And I was just like, no one had ever. Of course, there are times where people are like, do you remember what you did last night? Did you know what you did? And it was always like shame. But she said, do you know what's happening to you? So like, when you and this are coming together, do you know what's happening in your body? Do you know where you're going? Are you aware of that? So it wasn't like, do you want to stop this? Do you want to quit? Do you know that you're, it was like, do you understand it? And my answer was no. And that was the only thing that made me, where I had to ask myself the next question, which was, do you want to know? And I was like, fuck yeah, I think I have to know. Like, I think I have to know. So it is grace. Like,
You were ready then.
I was almost ready. I was ready. Well, once I told my mom and my sister, I was on the hook. So that was it. But so a few days later, I told them, and then I knew I was on the journey because, But I think that having an understanding of it outside of the moralizing and the stigma and all that, if we think about what it is, chronic illness. If you think about it, just like everything, what I always say to my family and what I try and contextualize in my book is that chronic illness is with us, in our world, especially for racialized people, and it just inflames the body. So you're constantly, and it leads, doctors absolutely correlate it to what? Autoimmune disease, diabetes, substance use disorder, directly. So it was okay that people developed diabetes and high blood pressure, even though people do shame people for those types of diseases as well, my mother, my grandfather, etc. But everything else was just like, it was very sad. Something had happened to these people. But when I was an addict, you better stop. You better fix. You didn't get that from me. It was like an immediate switch. And so what I try and do is just be like, these things are the same. They live together. We have to take care of them, together, side by side, shoulder to shoulder. So, my sister has an autoimmune disease. My mother has diabetes, high blood pressure. Everyone has suffered from something. This is how it manifested in me. This is what we're living with. This is the pain we're living with. And so, those kinds of things, if you're able to think about it that way, I think you can understand how to approach it with someone, because you're checking your own judgment. So I think if you just start with your own awareness about when they're telling me something, what is the thought in my mind, and cancel it, interrupt it. You actually don't know if you're not experiencing it, and you're just really there to listen. And so it's like the dedication in my book is to all of my nieces and nephews, Jules, Zaire, Joshua, Emma, Isabella, and Leo. And I just said, if and when you ever have to go first, I'll be here for you. And that's it. That's all you can say to someone. I'll be here for you.
Yeah.
I'm going to be here for you. And that's it. That's all recovery is. You know, like, Laura, you're doing this amazing thing. You know, you're really setting an example for me. And so I want to be here for you. That's it. You know?
Thank you.
You too, Emily.
Oh, thanks.
We have time for one more question.
Tani.
Hey.
Hey, yes.
The sexperts. Yes.
It's so nice to see you all outside of an Instagram
Yes.
screen. I know we're all internet friends, so finally
Yes.
seeing each other in 3D. So a lot of us in the recovery community know about sobriety toolboxes, hobbies, activities, affirmations that keep us sober. So I'd love to know each of, you know, if you want to share a couple of yours that help you guys stay sober.
Well, I meditate every morning when I wake up.
Oh, you're so good.
So this is what I do. This is what I do. I wake up. Scott's usually still asleep unless he's surfing.
Calling out Scott.
I wake up, I go downstairs, let our dog out of the garage. She impatiently watches me meditate. I've started his coffee. I put in 3 ice cubes. I pour his coffee after I finish meditating. I bring it back up. I come back down to the garage. The dog follows me. And I work out 5 days a week.
Good for you.
And I try to do something for my recovery every day, whether it's talking to somebody that I'm working with in recovery or going to a meeting or speaking at a meeting. I try to do something like that every day. I also, again, try to be really mindful of that slippery slope for me that is honesty and really check myself. The end of the day, if I have red in my ledger, if I owe somebody something, if I wasn't honest about something, if I could have done better, I don't beat myself up. I just set an intention to do something better, to do better the next day. And sometimes to go back and apologize to that person or take responsibility for something. There's probably more, but those are the things that I definitely have in my toolbox that I utilize every single day. The 3 ice cubes for Scott is, you know, that's the thing.
Celery juice? No, I'm kidding.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm also a creature of habit. Routine really helps me. Working out really helps me. But also, I have to be mindful of rest. Like,
Rest, that's good.
I can feel my body in a tense position. I know I'm full of fucking chemicals and, you know, and I have to just, one of the notes that came up through writing this book is like, yes, but how did this feel? And I was like, what do you mean? Like, I wrote it. Like, but yeah, I was like completely disconnected from my body. And that was really scary. And like, I'm almost 7 years in. I'm writing this book and like, oh my God, I don't know how I feel. Like, what the fuck? So yeah, I would just say, like, as much as we feel like we're inside of ourselves and we have an understanding, we know how we feel, I think it's just pause is so incredible. Deep breaths. Like, I went to a body worker and she was like, let's start with breathing. I was like, obviously I breathe. She's like, no, you're not doing it right. I was like, oh, fuck, okay. So basics. Back to basics. But yeah, like, you surround yourself with people who you trust. One of the greatest gifts, which is what you talk about, is that you learn how to conduct healthier relationships for yourself and for other people. So that's the greatest gift. I have a Scott too. He's here.
Yeah. Nice.
So but I had to be real sober to take that on. But we'll take that on the next book.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, exercise and meditation are in my toolbox, but they stay there. I don't take them out. Those are things that have been very helpful for me at times.
That's hilarious.
During the pandemic, I started taking a Britney Spears dance class every Tuesday.
You did. That's right.
And then I've had my last couple birthdays, I've had private dance classes to Britney. And so, like, Britney Spears is a tool, I think. And live music also is like kind of like as close as I get to like being able to get high. Just like cathartic.
Yeah, I like that. Britney Spears is a tool.
She might be my higher power.
Yeah,
Oh, shit.
not just you.
I think,
Oh,
are we
are we
done? Was that
done?
it?
Give them all a big hand.
No, no.
Great. Thank all three of you. And thank you all for coming. Go buy the books at the bookstore and then come back in here and line up, and Laura will personalize your books and chat some more. So thanks a lot.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, wow.
That was great. You did so good.
But Melanie, you set the tone by telling us what you said.